PKO, when you look at intersection of tech and entertainment, what are some of the signals you look for?
Our sweet spot is seed plus. They have something that looks like product market fit if possible. They build fast, they launch quickly, they iterate quickly, they're able to experiment, adjust to feedback and market conditions and other things like that, versus people who they raise and they disappear for 6 to 18 months and then they put something out there only to find like, oh, nobody actually wants this.
All 100 of us, you've got friends here.
Welcome to the IDK Show, hosted by Bu Zhi DAO members. My name is Jackie. Bu Zhi DAO is a nonprofit DAO that brings people together who loves Web3 and love Taiwan. We're having Taipei Blockchain Week in December 12th. We're aiming to bridge different communities from around the world to build a Web3 ecosystem for Taiwan and with Taiwan, connecting builders, investors, creators, founders, and general Web3 community. Our guest today is Patrick Lee. Patrick is co-founder and managing partner of PKO. PKO invests in tech and entertainment. The four partners, all-star roster, Kevin Lin, Holly Liu, and Kun Gao. Patrick is also the co-founder and founding CEO of Rotten Tomatoes. And from what I know about you on Twitter, you're also a Web3 DJ. I see you, repping different projects like 9gag, Meme Land, On-Chain Monkey. You're very deep into Web3. So I can't wait to talk more about your experience in Taiwan and Web3 in general.
Yeah, that sounds good. Happy to jump in.
Did you grow up in Taiwan? How often did you come back? How was your experience in Taiwan?
I was actually born in the States, but my parents were born in China, in Fujian, but they grew up in Taiwan. They went there when they were like 2 or 3 because of the war. They grew up there. They went all the way through college, and then they went to the US for grad school. So I was born in the States in LA. And then I definitely remember going back, I think twice during high school. One time for a whole month, we actually went because I was really into like martial arts, Chinese opera, Chinese dance. I actually went to Taiwan with our Chinese school for a month to train in Chinese opera. I think later on, after we sold Rotten Tomatoes, I was living in China for 3 years, in Xiamen, and then Hong Kong for 6 years. And during those 9 years, I went to Taiwan a couple of times just to visit, but always for 3 days to a week. So this last trip where I was there for 6 months was the longest I've ever been there by far. And even then, I was only originally planning to go for about 3, but I liked it so much, I extended to 6. And we were planning to stay there to have our baby, which would have been in September. So we would have been there for like probably a year overall. But we ended up leaving because of, a COVID outbreak that happened in June.
Yeah. Are you excited to go back?
Yeah. I mean, we wanted to go back for a while now. It's just that, once we had our daughter and, having to wait for her to get to 6 months old so that we could get her vaccinated and everything like that. So, now it's to a point where it's safe to travel again. And we just needed the right excuse. And so we thought, going back, speaking at Taipei Blockchain Week and NFT Taipei, and also having my partners all going, Holly Liu from Kabam, Kun Gao, who's co-founder of Crunchyroll, and then Kevin Lin, who's co-founder of Twitch, who's already there. They were like, okay, that'd be good. We all go back together. We all participate in these conferences and really start kind of engaging the Taiwan blockchain community.
Yeah, excited for you to meet the Bu Zhi DAO family, community, the builders and founders trying to push Taiwan Web3 ecosystem.
Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to it. I love the name too. It's so creative.
Yes. Thank you. I mean, I love the name Private Keep Out also. That's also very creative. You want to tell us why you came up with the name? Yeah,
it's actually because a long time ago, there was this person, Phil Kaplan, known as Pud, and he had a website called Effed Company. And it basically wrote about companies that were dying. I'm not sure if you've ever seen the Web3 is going great by Molly White now, kind of saying all the bad things that are happening around Web3. Effed Company was basically that around internet companies. This was in the late 90s. He ran a mailing list called Super Secret Club, the SSC. And it had some really amazing founders in there. Like Kevin Rose was in there, the Dig founders, the Flickr founders, the YouTube founders, the Twitter founders, etc. For whatever reason, he got busy and he stopped maintaining the list. And so many years later, I was talking to a friend. He did a company, Dan Huddle, who was doing a company called Xanga, Xanga, the blogging site. And he was like, oh, that sounds really cool. We should bring it back. And so we brought it back and we tried to come up with a name that kind of had the same feeling of Super Secret Club. SSC for Super Secret Club, we were private keep out, and we called it PKO. And we basically just started adding notable tech founders into the group. And it's kind of been growing over 10 years now. And now it's 160 folks.
Yeah, initially I was like, wait, is it Patrick Kuhn.
Yeah.
I was like, oh no, the last letter doesn't add up.
Patrick Kuhn, Kevin Holly, but it's not quite. But it does seem like a lot of people think that.
Were you looking into Web3 last time you were in Taiwan already?
Web3 was in the radar, but it wasn't specifically Web3. It's more just the intersection of tech and entertainment. I was interested in like metaverse, VR, AR, just anything that was kind of at the intersection.
Would you say you focus more on Web3 nowadays?
Yeah, so I ended up doing an investment syndicate. We started in March of last year, so in 2021. I run a group for notable tech founders. There's about 160 of us in the group. Been running it for over a decade. Holly Liu helps to admin it with me. And we thought maybe let's do a syndicate so we can invest into this community's companies. People really liked it, so we expanded it to allow more folks in who weren't in the tech founder group but were kind of adjacent to us. And also we expanded it to allow members to refer companies that they invested in for us to look at. We later brought Kevin on board. And because of our backgrounds with Rotten Tomatoes, Kabam, Crunchyroll, and Twitch, we decided to focus only at the intersection of tech and entertainment. And we've ended up investing in 45 companies since March of last year, raised over almost 35 million for them across, I think, 420 investors. When we first started, I think the first 9 companies we invested into, none of them were Web3. And then since that time, 3/4 of all the companies we invested into after the first 9 were Web3 related. Because so much stuff was happening at the intersection of tech and entertainment in Web3, that once we started moving that direction, it seemed like that's most everything that we saw. Like so many companies were in that space. There was so much like energy in that space. So we just kind of dived in deep. And at that time, I was like a complete noob. I had to like figure out how to set up a wallet, all those kinds of things. And even now, I would not say I'm definitely not an expert by any means. But we have seen a lot of companies using NFTs or something like that, focusing around some kind of creative industry or community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like tech and entertainment, that's such a broad term, right? Like how does Web3 kind of supercharge this tech and entertainment intersection?
Right. So I think the areas that I find really interesting is I feel like Web3 can supercharge communities. And I've been doing communities since high school. I was running a bulletin board system where, with that, I had a second phone line and people literally had to dial in with their modem to access the bulletin board, all the way through like Rotten Tomatoes. I was doing a company called Alive Not Dead in Hong Kong that was like working with celebrities, artists over there. We were doing like the official Jet Li, Jackie Chan sites, Karen Mok, Daniel Wu was one of my co-founders. I've been doing community for a very long time. And I thought Web3 is really interesting because the community is the product. When you're talking about like NFT communities, right? Whereas almost everything else, community forms around a product or service. So like Rotten Tomatoes, we had a very active, like hardcore movie buff like community. We had among the most active movie forums at the time when we were running it, but it just forums around Rotten Tomatoes, around the service, around movies in general. It was something that we wanted to support, but it wasn't the product itself. Web3 with NFT communities, it is a product. People are actually coming in, they're buying NFTs, they're owning their membership. And if the community is not for them, they can sell and leave the community, right? But when they have ownership, some really interesting things happen. One is they're going to want to support and evangelize that community. So you'll see them as simple as just using their NFT as their profile picture, promoting that community. An extreme case would be like, Eminem and Snoop Dogg making a music video where they're using their Bored Apes in the music video, and it having, I think, over 60 million views. I think the other things that are really interesting about supercharging communities is the fact that anyone in the community can contribute and build for that community. And by doing so, they strengthen the community and increase the value of that community. So like a good example is something like loot, right? I mean, it's just like these simple NFTs, text descriptions of like items that you would find in a bag of loot in a D&D game. And people took that and built games and apps and all kinds of things to support it. They're incentivized to do that because they have ownership in that community. And then the third thing I think is super interesting around ownership, that anyone can integrate those NFTs in to their own projects, even if they're not even members of the community, to expand the ecosystem. A couple of the companies we invested into, Pixels, Galaxy Fight Club, Jadu, like they actually integrated NFTs from popular collections in. You could basically bring them in use them as like an avatar, play with them in a game or app. All these things are super interesting that you don't really see with traditional communities that aren't in Web3. For example, if I subscribe to Netflix, I'm just a subscriber. Like I don't own my subscription. I can't like resell it, anything like that. I can just cancel it. The fact that there is that ownership really kind of meshes well with this intersection of tech and entertainment, especially when you're thinking about creators, IP, talent. There's some very interesting things that can happen there that don't really happen outside of Web3.
Yeah, it sounds like what you were saying was, a big reason for Rotten Tomatoes' success is how strong of a community you guys built. Using Web3, supercharging it, you're now able to do even more. I guess, what are some of the lessons you learned from building community, starting from Rotten Tomato days, and bringing that into Web3? Any advice to people, builders, founders of like, how do you build the best community, the best product? Like you said, community is the product, which I 100% agree.
I have not built a community for Web3 yet. I'm definitely looking a lot into that. And I'm like researching and join a number of communities to try to understand better about that process. From what I've seen so far, it's quite different. The scale is different. In Web 2, you will have hundreds of thousands or millions or tens of millions or hundreds of millions or billions of users. And so it's extremely large, but there isn't ownership. And so you're usually worrying about scale of like, how do you fight spam, toxicity, fake news, all these other kind of issues, like a Reddit, a Twitter, all of them have to kind of deal with that. When you're talking about Web3, a typical NFT collection would be like 10,000. And it wouldn't be 10,000 owners. It's usually 4,000 to 7,000, something in that range. So it's a much, much smaller number. And when you're dealing with those numbers, you can be much, much more hands-on with each community member. Each one has a lot more voice. You can interact with them more closely. Like, for example, with 9gag, Memeland, they have the MVP, which is, I think, 300 holders, something like that. And Ray, who is a founder of 9gag, is in there answering questions from people directly every single day. And that is not something that you'll really see as much on Web2. Or I guess, Elon's on Twitter all the time, but he doesn't really know, for the most part, who he's responding to. So I think with Web3, there's a lot less folks, but they have ownership and a much closer relationship to the creators and the folks who are kind of helping to run these communities. And I think that's really interesting because you can do things like live events, Twitter Spaces, or an AMA, or any of those kinds of things. It's a much, much smaller group that you can create relationships with members of the community, and they can create relationships among each other.
Do you guys know what you guys will be talking about at Taipei Blockchain Week or NFT Taipei? Any sneak peeks of what people might get to hear?
We have been actively researching and brainstorming on an idea. We are looking at talking about sort of that, making that transition from Web 2 to Web 3, because all of us are coming from Web 2. And we've all been doing companies at the intersection of tech and entertainment. We all monetize differently. For example, Rotten Tomatoes was licensing and ads. Kabam was mobile gaming from a free-to-play perspective. Crunchyroll subscription and merchandise and live events. And then Twitch is actually like a lot of it's coming from subscription and donations, but directly from the user to the streamer. Between us, we hit like all the major kind of consumer-focused ways of monetizing in Web 2.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that. That's so fascinating.
Yeah.
Wow. And we have you guys on a panel, all four of you guys together. So that'll be really interesting.
It's the first time the four of us have ever been on a panel together.
No way. Wow, that's super exciting. Okay. Can't wait. And I know Kevin built other community teams at Twitch too. So that community experience, building experience, lends itself super well in Web3. I can't wait to hear what new idea you guys are working on.
Yeah, no, and that's a good point. All four of us have done community around our companies as well. Like all four of us have been touching communities for a very long time.
Yeah, I feel like community is such it's like, one of the most important things in Web3, but also often the least understood and hardest thing to master, because it's like you're dealing with people, right? You're not dealing with code, robots, machine. It's like, your community, your people. You have to really spend the time as founders, builders to really talk to your community. I know in Web 2, startups, we always say talk to your users, but Web 3 kind of gives you that direct access to your community and your users.
Yeah, and one thing I would say about Web 3 and community, ownership is good because it can incentivize things like evangelism, contributing and building and, integrating and expanding like the ecosystem, but it also can be very, very bad in that it can attract a lot of speculators. And I would say for majority of NFT collections and communities, 90% or more are speculators. Because of it, they're very short patience. They just want, the value to go up. They are not there for any utility other than it makes money. And I think that is a huge problem with like NFT communities in general, is because of ownership, you attract a lot of speculators, kind of like a company that goes public. Once they go public, they are always trying to chase short-term gains to boost stock price. That is one of the biggest challenges to get around, is to actually be able to find the community that will think long-term, who actually values the utility of what that community is trying to build, and is not just there for speculation. The very rare communities that can actually get people who are able to think long-term, I think are going to be the strongest ones.
Yeah, I've heard of this theory, people talking about the best way to prevent a dump is to prevent a pump. So how do you manage expectations of whatever your product is? Short term, it looks great when whatever you have moons, right? But it can actually bite you in the back long term.
Yes, yeah.
Like NFT projects is one thing where people kind of contribute, build the IP, build the brand. And on the other side, there's also stuff like DAOs, right? Like DAOs are like kind of this membership system where everyone can help. What are your thoughts on DAOs in general?
My feeling with DAOs as of right now is, from a legal tax perspective, all that kind of stuff, I feel like they're more complicated to do. You can go and put out an NFT collection relatively easily. I think there's problems of just putting it out and not having much to back it up. But with a DAO, I think do it properly, just legally, it's very complicated from what I've heard to actually set it up, in terms of like, I don't know, Cayman, BVI, or some kind of structure. And for an average person to be a member, it's much more complicated. I think there's a lot of like, you have to write proposals, you have to do governance, voting. And for a normal person, I think that's a lot to ask of them. At the same time, I want to say DAOs are, my sense is they're even more small, more intimate than an NFT collection. An NFT collection might have 4,000 to 7,000 owners. A DAO could be, 30 to a couple hundred folks is the sense I have. So it's even more intimate. But I also feel like from a brand perspective, they don't turn into brands as much as like an NFT collection. A lot of people know Bored Ape and some of these other ones that even folks who are not into Web3 or any of that stuff, they know about it. But like when you think of DAOs, outside of maybe Constitution DAO, which kind of died, there's probably no DAO that a normal person has heard of. Maybe Friends with Benefits might be, I think, one of the most well-known ones. And even so, unless you're in Web3, I don't think you would have any idea what that is.
Yeah, that's really good points. A lot of NFT communities kind of turn into DAOs too, or they go towards that direction just to be more decentralized. Also on the securities legal perspective, it's also beneficial. When I first heard about private keep out PKO investments, I thought like, hey, this could be this format sounds like a cool DAO.
Believe me, we actually looked at that. We looked at possibly going to a fund, possibly going to a DAO, or a fund plus a DAO, kind of like Orange DAO does. So we were looking into that space, but we just felt like it was a little bit complicated and structurally it's a little bit unclear. And we didn't want to do something that potentially could be deemed like a security or whatever. Although even NFT collections, that is a possibility.
Private keep out, PKO, when you look at intersection of tech and entertainment, what are some of the signals you look for? I think you mentioned like a strong community. If you invest in like projects in Taiwan versus projects in the US, are there things you look for differently?
No, anything we look at, we look at the whole world, especially, because of COVID, it's like we do almost all our calls, through Zoom. Very rarely will I do an in-person that's actually a pitch meeting now. Our sweet spot is seed plus. And so what we're looking at that stage is they have something that looks like product market fit if possible. Do they have some sort of traction, right? Whether that's engagement retention, if it's like a mobile game or mobile app, revenue, depending if it's like enterprise or if it's Web3, have they actually launched something? If they launched, how did it do? Did they mint out? Is the floor price above mint? Their traffic and engagement, their click around, check out engagement around their posts. How many likes and retweets and comments and stuff like that. Do they seem like real people, or have they done something before? Have they built things before? If it's Web3, how Web3 native are they? What kind of technology, what kind of problem are they solving? The number one thing is really traction. You can have done a lot of stuff before, but you can easily launch something and it can still bomb, or vice versa. You can kind of be new to the space, but you're able to launch something and get it out there and it does well. So traction, I think, is by far the most important. If we start looking earlier, like pre-seed, it's very rare that we do that, but generally what we're looking for is like ideally like a strong repeat founder doing something, working in a space that they're already strong in. They build fast, they launch quickly, they iterate quickly, they're able to experiment, adjust to feedback and market conditions and other things like that, and put something out there versus people who they raise and they disappear for 6 to 18 months before they put out anything. They're not really getting much feedback. And then they put something out there only to find like, oh, nobody actually wants this.
It's always good to get feedback and find more product market fit. But with Web3, when you launch stuff, it's a lot less reversible. So I think the quick iteration, that kind of process is perhaps different in Web3. Do you have any thoughts on how founders can iterate fast in Web3?
What I've seen folks do that I think is interesting is they'll sort of like build in public. Ray, I feel like, has done a really good job of doing that with 9gag Memeland. He doesn't really even reveal until it's very close to being launched. And he has researched and looked at what other projects are doing and kind of doing the best of what other folks are doing. Adjust to feedback, adjust to market conditions very quickly. Most people have this extremely detailed roadmap. They over promise and under deliver. Like I would say the vast majority of them do that. And it's not necessarily that they're trying to rug pull. They just really are not estimating correctly. It's very easy for things to take twice as long, cost twice as much as you think. Web3 changes so quickly, it doesn't make sense to necessarily stick to a roadmap based on what's happening. You know, when you have like Terra Luna, right? You have FTX, all this stuff. Sometimes you have to change. And I've seen a lot of folks who have to go push back their launch of their NFT collection. And I think it's much better to be flexible, constantly interacting with your community, getting feedback, testing things, talking through things, and still putting out things quickly, but in smaller increments. So I think that makes a lot of sense to me. And I think the same is true in Web2, launching quickly, iterating quickly. Yes, with an NFT collection itself, you don't want to rush that part, but I think once you have it out there, I think you do need to iterate quickly and respond to feedback.
You don't really look at projects on where they're based, right? Like, as in like you kind of see it globally. You use the same kind of brush for every project you see, whether it's Taiwan or the US. Yeah.
I mean, we've already invested, like Taiwan, we already invested into Ludex, Arsong, that are both based over there. I think Meta Theory has a lot of the development there. High Street has I think some development there as well. We invested into companies like in Thailand. ChillChat is based out there. Tatsumiku is Singapore. There's a bunch more. But yeah, I mean, we look at the whole world.
The Taiwan Web3 ecosystem, what are the things you like about it, strengths and weaknesses? And I know Web3, everything's global, right? But you know, how does the Taiwanese community, ecosystem, projects kind of make it out there and make a louder noise in the world?
You know, traditionally, Taiwan has always been very good, even now, around semiconductors. Like it's the strongest in the world at that. I feel like for any geographic location, you want to have the thing that you're really strong in. LA, it's Hollywood, it's entertainment, right? New York, it's finance. It may be almost a problem that Taiwan is so good at semiconductors that it may be very difficult to move away from that. And thinking about hardware versus Web3 is like opposite ends of the spectrum. Because it's so good at it, it might be hard to do something else. Like if suddenly LA is like, hey, we want to be finance now or fashion, like it just might not work. In LA, Hollywood is so strong around entertainment that everything is there, the whole ecosystem, the studios and distribution, all the actors and directors and producers, everything is there. Just like Bay Area for technology in general, right? Berkeley and Stanford, you have all the biggest VCs in the world are there. I think Taiwan has that ecosystem for semiconductors around hardware. Web3, I think they are quite good, but I think you have to build up that ecosystem. One thing that someone mentioned to me that I thought was interesting, you know, because Taiwan's status as a country is kind of more up in the air than probably almost any place else in the world, possibly being able to play a role similar to like Switzerland for storing money. Lack of clarity around its status to fully embrace like DeFi and Web3 and be like the place for it. I thought that was kind of an interesting idea, but the idea being, could you take something and be the best at it? And I feel like there are some places that are attempting to do it, like Bahamas a little bit, Singapore, Miami are some places that really try to very proactively like embrace Web3. If it was Web3, if Taiwan would truly embraced it at all levels, from the government to the accelerators to the people funding it, to people using it, to people building and developing for it.
There's actually a strong emphasis on Web3 from the government too in Taiwan. So that's really encouraging to see. There's a department called Ministry of Digital Affairs led by Audrey Tang, and they're also looking into like Web3 for like civic tech, public goods. And there's a lot of like open source communities in Taiwan who are also like have like 10 years of history called Gov0. I'm not sure if you heard of them. And they actually recently started a Web3 initiative, a DAO called DAO0. And they're kind of building out how to supercharge open source community using Web3. All these events happening, all this energy kind of resurfacing with the COVID lockdown being loosened, everyone coming back to Taiwan. And with all the Web3 energy, we can hopefully build the ecosystem up together.
I'm looking forward to it. And Taiwan definitely feels like one of the major cities where things are happening around Web3.
Thank you so much for the time. I know you gotta go soon, and we just can't wait to see you in Taiwan.
Gosh, it felt like 2 years or something. It's all just been Zoom, speaking to accelerators and tech conferences over Zoom. This will actually be my first kind of like Web3 conferences to actually attend or speak at. I'm really looking forward to it. I just want to see what that energy looks and feels like in person.
Yeah, what an honor. Can't wait to see you at Taipei Blockchain Week.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. And yeah, looking forward to it.
All right, talk to you soon.
Thanks. Bye.
我不知道